Hi, so today I want to talk about some of the things that I've been working on recently, and one of the things that I've been most interested in recently is improving performance in scenes. So I've been doing a little bit of research on some of the best ways to do that, and one of the things that I've found is culling. So there's occlusion culling and frustum culling. It seems to be a little bit sort of unknown, but frustum culling actually takes place in Unity already. You just don't have sort of a visualization of that. So the frustum is this pyramid that represents the camera, the view, and you can see that in the inspector here. It's to do with the clipping planes and field of view, stuff like that. So the frustum is really just the exact sort of the lines where stuff gets seen, and everything outside of that, everything to the left and the right and behind the camera isn't rendered. But what is rendered, and because of the clipping plane having a far, so this far is 1000, so it goes way out there. But how it renders is it takes the furthest images, the furthest assets that it can see on screen, and draws them to the screen. So it's drawing these back row of pines first, and then there's sort of more front pines and these rocks, and it's just placing it over itself. So we can see that in scene by opening the stats and clicking play. So right now, in the general sort of direction that the player is looking, there's around 320,000 tries and around 600 batches. So we get up here, and there's very little, and that is because I have occlusion culling on, and we can tell that by outside of play, clearing my bake data, so I can do this all again. One thing that I want to quickly do . So there's no bake data anymore. It's still the same, 320, 330, 600 batches. But right now, we're still getting all of those tries. And it's a little bit less because the camera is closer, so it's cutting out some things, but realistically, we're still getting way too many. So that's what occlusion culling can do. It can take those tries and batches down by a heap, and I'll show you why that's happening. So to begin with sort of getting occlusion culling set up, what you want to do is you want to take all the static, so non-moving objects in the scene, and make them static up in the inspector. And so that's going to kick off a bunch of lighting jobs and stuff, but what you can do is you can then find your occlusion dockable tab, and that you can find that from window, occlusion culling. So just dock it anywhere, and you've got these three sort of tabs: object, bake, and visualization. So the more important one is bake, and the parameters you've got in here. So what these parameters mean is the smallest occluder. So what the occlusion culling bake does is it will, until the nth degree of any models and meshes in your scene, it will create zones. And the smallest occluder is how large should the smallest of those zones be. and what will happen with them is the camera, the frustum will see a zone and render anything within that zone, but it will not render anything outside of that zone. So I'll just do another bake. I want this to be a little bit more accurate, but default is pretty good for situations like indoors and maze sort of games where you've got a lot of rooms and corridors. So I'm going to take that down to 4. But what the smallest hole is the smallest, it's basically a volume or size of the frustum that you can see through. So there's no mesh there, but there's mesh on either side, up and below. How small can that be before I stop rendering what's inside that hole, what you can see through? So I find 0.25 is generally actually pretty good. So I'm going to bake that, and you'll be able to see all of these little zones that I talked about. And it tries to make bigger zones to save on size where it can, because it can see that there's nothing in here, so it's trying to be helpful. It's not as accurate as it could be. So we're trying to get our occlusion data size down here to as low as possible. 1 megabyte is not too bad, but it's got to be read all the time. So the faster this, the lower this size, the faster it's going to be, because what will happen is you'll start seeing artifacts when you move really quickly to the left or right, and you might see popping, so objects popping into view. And that's what your occlusion data size will help you. You want that to be as small as possible. So right now we can't see any occlusion happening. So occlusion being objects being removed or occluded. But what we can do is we can press play and come over to visualize. You see a bunch of stuff just disappeared and reappeared. So I'm going to back out a bit so you can see the whole map. And so as my frustum moves over these zones, anything within that zone will start popping into existence. So it's not 100% accurate because the zones are larger than the objects themselves. So I can't see either of those 2 trees, yet they're both being rendered in the scene. But that's alright. That just comes down to how accurate you want your bake to be. But just keep in mind the occlusion data size. So what this is now doing is it's going to say, yeah, right here, at the top of my camera, can still see some of the zones. There are trees within those zones, so we're not going to take any of them out. But if I get a little bit closer, I can't see those zones anymore. It's going to just chop them all off. So I go from 180,000 tries to 44, just a blink of an eye. So, and everything is running a lot smoother now. So obviously this could be helpful in multiple scenes. It's commonly used for indoors. I think that's where it kind of shines, but I also like playing around with it now in sort of outdoor scenes, because you can gate players into certain areas where they can no longer see sort of high geometry meshes and stuff like that, just to really sort of customize how performance heavy a scene is. So that's about it. There's some other tools with the occlusion culling, such as visibility lines. This will just help you sort of identify exactly where the frustum is looking and how accurate your zones are. You can definitely see in the scene view that it's rendering a lot more than it needs to right now. That's generally, you want a little bit on the edge, because you don't want that fast movement to be faster than they can pop into existence. So I think that's alright. Then there's portals, which are to do with areas. So if we didn't bake in this way, but we can sort of occlude entire areas and only see through portals. But that's not the way we're baking, so a lot is happening without occlusion culling. Looking behind you, that stuff wasn't there when you're looking this way. It's not being rendered. It's not on the camera, but all the stuff in the frustum is. So occlusion culling seems to be the best way to really improve that performance and get a better result. That's about it. Yeah. So just to go over it again, you want your occlusion data size as small as possible, and that will mean having a smaller occluder, and I think a larger, smallest hole. So the more you can get rid of in your scene without having any impact on sort of the experience, the better. And these values will help you a lot. So that's about it for now, and I'll see you guys in the next video.